Lee, I think the majority of the good people in our church family know at least part of your story, but you never know who might be tuning in to this message. So if you don't mind, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Okay, well, thank you. Thank you for this opportunity. Well, I think any good story really needs to begin at the beginning, and that will be with my parents. My mother was born and raised in North Dakota, and upon finishing high school, she went to the Mayo Medical Clinic where she received her registered nurse certification. My father was born and raised in Kansas City, Missouri, and at the time, he went into the Navy during World War II and served in the Pacific. Following the end of the war, my father was in school. He completed his schooling, and somewhere along the way, in a job, he met my mother, and they were wed. And I came along. I was born in Wisconsin. Then we moved to we moved to Wichita, Kansas. Those are my very first memories. Then my father was transferred to Hamilton, Ohio, just north of Cincinnati. Hamilton is where I grew up. I graduated high school there. All my early memories are from that community. I attended my freshman year of school at Miami University in Oxford, Ohio. Following that, my father was transferred and took the transfer to Greensboro, North Carolina with his company. I, along with the rest of my family, followed him here. I graduated school from UNC Greensboro with a degree in biology. During my college, I started working in restaurants and started waiting tables and was actually quite good at it. When I finished college, I had kind of the wild hair and wanted to travel a little bit. I loaded up my small car and went across country, stopping along the way, and landed in Denver, Colorado. Little did I know that I would be there for 15 years. I sometimes will refer to that as my bohemian lifestyle during that time. But along the way, I found myself at a Vineyard Christian Fellowship. And that is where I met my wife to be. And a couple years later, I found myself at a Messianic congregation, Roa Israel, primarily very much of a Jewish-oriented worshiping Yeshua. And little did I know, Mary Ellen walked in. And several months later, maybe a year later, we were wed. And then a couple of years after that, Gabriel came. Divine Providence came calling. And we left Colorado with tears in our eyes. And after a little bit of moving around, we landed back in Greensboro. And after some struggle, I found my calling of teaching school. And so this last year and a half ago, I retired after nearly 25 years of teaching in Guilford County schools. And I taught math, I taught science, and taught chemistry. I taught at Allen J. Middle, Southern Middle, and Southeast Middle, and my final assignment was at James B. Dudley High School. Also along the way, I managed to be an athlete my entire life. I ran cross country in high school. I began riding a bicycle in college, and then landing in Colorado was a bicycle mecca, and I loved riding my bicycle there many thousands of miles a year. Loved riding up and down the mountains of Colorado. Going down the mountain, going fast, fast, fast. If I miss this turn, it's going to be my last. That was also one of my favorite songs while I was skiing. I was a near expert skier in Colorado, and I was able to go down many of the very steep diamond runs. Then when we moved here to North Carolina, I no longer had time to ride my bicycle, and a promise I made to the Lord many years ago was that when the time came, I would give up riding my bicycle, and I did. But the Lord doesn't take anything out of our lives without replacing it with something else, and I began running. And over several years, I began mounting up my runs, 5K, 10K, half marathons, and finally was able to accomplish running marathons. And I ran 13 marathons. Great adventures that they were. I've been blessed with enormous amounts of education. I have 2 master's degrees, which I never thought I would ever have. And I've read lots and lots of books. I am blessed with my wife, Mary Ellen, and I have 3 boys that are growing up to be very, very fine young men.
Well, of course, of the many things that make up the incredible person that you are, one of them is that you have a condition called ALS. Can you tell us a little bit about what that means for you?
ALS, I didn't know a thing about it. And it was about 3.5 years ago that when I would go out for my runs, I started falling. And falling is just part of being out and about, but they started falling more frequently. I went in to see my doctor for my annual physical about 2.5 years ago. And I explained to him what was going on. I thought to myself I wasn't going to the gym enough. And he was horrified, sent me over to a neurologist here in town at Guilford Neurological. They ran tons of studies on me, and the doctor, had the data, and then she immediately recommended me to go to a neurologist, a professor over at Wake Forest University at the school there, and he made the diagnosis that I had ALS. At that point, I had heard of it. I was aware of Lou Gehrig. I was aware of Stephen Hawking, but I didn't know what that meant. I very quickly found out that what it means is that it's motor neuron death. The motor neurons in our body die, and that the disease is different for everyone. For me, it started in my left leg, and I noticed that because I was dragging my toes when I was falling while I was running. And then I was starting to ride my bike again, and I was falling off my bike. I mean, very odd things that was occurring. The disease itself is progressive. A year ago, I could walk about 1.5 miles. Last January, I was still able to swim. And since then, I really haven't been able to do much. I have retired from teaching. And one of my goals for teaching for my retirement was that I was going to buy a new bike and ride cross country. Instead, I've managed to have a very fancy wheelchair that you've all seen me kind of cruising around in. I had hoped to go on some pilgrimages, but the pilgrimage I'm on now is very different than what I thought it might be.
Well, Lee, death is obviously a reality that all of us face. It's an imminent reality, though it's one I don't think we ever really want to acknowledge. And I know that ALS forces you to face it, but it also helps you to see life maybe differently. And I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about how you have seen life differently in light of your illness and this last bit of the journey you've been on.
Okay. I find I do a lot of reflection, and I think part of my growing to maturity and faith in the Lord has been reflection. When I was much younger, I was reflecting on the life that I was living and deciding that was not the life I wanted to have. Then when I found myself in churches and being discipled, I reflected on the life that I was hoping to have and to become. And now I find myself reflecting on the life that I've had. I know the average lifespan for someone diagnosed with ALS is 3 to 5 years. Some people go much more quickly than that, and some people go on for decades afterwards. I know that the average is, again, 3 to 5 years, and I'm 3.5 years in. During this time, I've reflected on the life that I've had, and I'm not angry, I'm not bitter, I'm not cynical. I find myself with deep gratefulness for the life that I've had and for the children that I have and for my wife. I've mentioned some of the great adventures that I've had. I wanted more and to do more, but I'm thankful for what I've had. I'm thankful for my friends. I'm thankful for the people I've gotten to know at Alamance Presbyterian and their deep love for me. I'm thankful for the books that I'm able to read and enjoy and discuss with many, many people. So, in sum, where I am with this, even though I know I have fewer days in front of me than behind me, I'm thankful for all that I have, and even in the moment of now.
Well, this question, I think in some ways is similar. How have these last couple of years led you to see God differently? And how has this season of your life impacted your faith and your maturing in faith?
I've had the privilege of teaching more exclusively within the church house, and with the Stephen ministry, which is really a very profound ministry, in that I have found it was more than just learning how to minister to people, it was discipleship. And I have found myself continuing to grow in faith by working with the other Stephen ministers is in a growing that discipleship. The second is small group. It is a small group, and it is a powerful group where we lift each other and encourage each other. And the third part of that is having a front row seat into people's lives. When you are sitting down talking with people and they're sharing what's going on in their lives, and you can see how God is working in their lives, it is truly an amazing thing to see and to behold. So I have a choice in this season. I could be angry, I could be bitter, I could be remorseful and think about the things I wanted to do or the things I could have done or maybe the things I should have done. But I've chosen deliberately to be thankful for the good things that I've had and the life the Lord has given to me. I live a redeemed life. I did talk a little bit about my bohemian lifestyle, and you can interpret that any way you want. But I live a redeemed life, and for that, I'm very, very thankful.
Another question I have, we're in the middle of, in the life of Alamance Church, a stewardship season. And one of the things that we've been thinking about in our stewardship is the legacy that our life leaves. And I'm just wondering, thinking big picture, what is the hope of Lee Shore's legacy? What is the story your life tells? What legacy do you hope to be leaving the church, but really God's whole world?
Thank you. That is really a powerful thing to consider and to think about. When Mary Ellen and I were engaged and we were talking about being married, we talked a lot about our families. And we talked about how we wanted to raise our children differently than what we were raised. My mother was an alcoholic. My father, who was not really my father, was emotionally and physically abusive. So I grew up in a really crazy home. And it took me a lot of years and a lot of work to undo that stuff. Thus far, we've raised our boys in a kind, loving, generous home. And I see them growing up to be fine young men. That's the heritage, that the generational curses no longer have authority over us, and for that I'm eternally thankful. As a school teacher, one always hopes that one touches the lives of kids, that one makes a difference in the lives of children. I really believe that I had that influence, especially when I was at Dudley. I saw the influence I had on a lot of those folks. I'm hoping that even my ministry through Stephen Ministry and teaching the Shirley Andrews class and the numbers of relationships I've had with folks will make a difference on God's faithfulness. God has been faithful to me, and I hope that is attested to very clearly by the people I've met and known here at Alamance. I've often been surprised about the generosity and love that has been shown to us, to my wife and I, and to my children. For that, I'm just, again, very, very thankful and hope that the Lord's work shows through that thankfulness.
Well, Lee, we are indeed thankful for the witness that you have shared with us. Really, the entire time that you've been a part of the congregation, you and Mary Ellen and your family, but especially too the ways that you have shown us what it means to walk with grace and humility and humor and a good
Humor.
yeah, and a good nature in a time that I know is tough. And I also think it's fair to say that that you have allowed the church to walk with you in that, and I think that's part of the legacy that you leave us. I think that the church has had an opportunity to be its best self and to learn from you in that, and I really appreciate that too. So just one more thing, not only are we in the thick of our stewardship season here in November of 2021, but in just a few days it's going to be Thanksgiving, and I encourage everyone to do this as we come upon Thanksgiving, just to take a minute and take stock of the things that we are all truly thankful for. And so that's really my last question to you today, though you've talked about it a bit already. What is Lee Shores thankful for today?
Oh gosh, all the things that I mentioned. The wonderful life and adventures that I've had, both in the church and in the schoolhouse. I have not mentioned the catering company that I worked for 2 decades, and the many adventures that I had there, and meeting people who are not necessarily believers. I often will refer to my friends in the catering house as my pirate, communist, anarchist friends. But I truly enjoyed working with them and loved them and hope it made an impact on them. I'm thankful for that opportunity. I'm thankful for the intellect the Lord has given to me to share with other people. I think about it that I have been an elder in 3 separate congregations, and that I've been honored by godly people to serve the body of Christ in those ways. I'm thankful for being able to serve at Alamance Presbyterian by teaching. And again, I'm thankful for my boys, my family. Ultimately, if we have not been successful in raising our own family, the book of James talks about that, we're really not all that successful. So I enter this season with a heart full of gratitude and thankfulness and appreciation for all the many good things that I've had. And I truly mean that. God has been faithful to me throughout my life, and I know God will continue to be faithful to Alamance Presbyterian and to the body of Christ at large.
Well, and thank you for your faithfulness in sharing the message with us today. Thanks for your witness. You and I talked about this a little bit, that really what I was asking you today is just to offer up a witness. And I know that you have a wonderful one to share. So do all the folks who are tuning in and watching. And I would just add my word of challenge for them. Find ways to tell your story, because your story is part of the legacy that you have to give the church and to God's kingdom in the world. And so thanks for this example of how to do that, and thanks for taking the time today, Lee. We appreciate you and love you.
Thank you.